All right, let's go ahead and kick it off. Got Mo just joined us. Thanks for joining us. All right, so today is July 9th, 2020, and welcome to the inaugural CSI Secret Store community call. For those, you should have the link, if you don't, to the doc, to the meetings doc. If you have that link, go ahead and just add yourself as an attendee so we know that you showed up. And while everyone jumps on that, just some housekeeping. This is a CNCF call, so it's under the code of conduct. And so just be nice to each other, and I think we'll be fine. One thing I will say, I know most calls are about 30 minutes. This is scheduled for an hour. I'm not sure we'll take the whole duration. But with that said, I'd like to, for the agenda items, let's go ahead and just prioritize things that need community, census on. So anyone that needs to kind of drop the call for the second half can do so and have their opinions heard.
Cool. And the HashiCorp guys just said they have a conflict right now. Company all hands.
No,
so
okay.
I guess they'll skip this, but I told them that this is recorded. So
yeah, this is being recorded, so I think we're good. Okay, with that, I'll be your MC today. I guess I can do double duty here and take notes as well. And let's go ahead and kick it off. So let's look at the discussion items here.
Should we do a round of intro, maybe?
Yeah, you're right. I totally forgot about that.
No worries.
Yeah, let's go ahead and introduce. You want to go first, Rita, or?
Yeah, sure. Can I just say I'm really, really excited. Thank you guys so much for joining this call. I know this is a long time coming, so I'm just really, really excited to have a lot of the contributors as part of this call. And obviously, with more providers joining, just hoping that we'll get more momentum in a lot of the provider work as well as the driver itself. So my name's Rita. I'm an engineer from Microsoft. I created the V1 version of this solution, and with help from SIG-Auth, we were able to basically donate it to Kubernetes SIG-Auth, and I see Mo on the call as well, so thanks for joining. So with that, I'll hand it off to other folks on the call.
Awesome. I'll go next. I think I'll echo the sentiment there, Rita. Totally excited that we got this call kind of off the ground. Excited about the innovation that's going to be happening. So I'm Phil Gibson. I'm one of the senior program managers here at Microsoft. I work along with Rita, and I basically manage and help with what we call our secure persona project. So CSI being one, we have our Azure AD Pod Identity, Gatekeeper, and the key KMS will be kicking off here soon. So totally looking forward to working with everyone here and excited. Who's next?
Okay. I'm Tommy. I'm at Google. I'm working on one of the plugins for the Google Secret Manager. So just got that open sourced through all of our wikits recently, and I'm starting kind of implementation and looking at hopefully getting it included as a supported provider shortly into the parent project here. So that's what I'm working on. Thanks.
Thanks, Tommy.
Welcome.
Yeah, welcome.
Hey, yeah, so I can go. Hey, I'm Anish. I'm an engineer at Microsoft. I work with Rita and Phil. Worked on the CSI driver primarily, and also the Azure provider for the CSI driver. And apart from that, in Microsoft, I work on security-related projects like Pod Identity and a couple of other projects. But really excited to be here and work with everyone in the community.
I can go next, I guess. My name is Brian. I'm also part of Microsoft now. I was working with Anish, Phil, and Rita during my apprentice program, actually, where my project was helping with the secrets rotation and the CSI drive in Azure provider. So I'm pretty excited to be here, especially as a kind of coming on more as a contributor from the community, as I'm switching teams and won't be working with them as a part of my job.
Awesome. Welcome aboard, Brian.
Thank you.
Cool. All right.
I'm the only one left. I think everyone else left.
No, I'm sorry. Yeah, we got a couple other people joining. I got to admit people. I got to figure out how people can just jump in. But I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Okay, cool. So yeah, I'm Mo. I'm one of the SIG auth chairs. I do remember reviewing this code. I admit I have forgotten what it does now. It's been like a long time. Yeah, happy to be here.
All right.
Awesome.
Excellent. And let's see, we got Lockie snuck in. Lockie, we're just doing a round of intros here, so if you want to chime in, go for it.
Yeah, hello, Lachlan Evenson. I work with Phil and Rita and Anish and a whole bunch of folks on this call from Microsoft. I've been responsible for PMing pieces of this project over time with Rita and the team. Just interested in helping it have a new life out there in the CNCF.
All right. Thanks, Lockie. All right. So I think we got everyone. Looking at the list, I think everyone's intro in. And yeah, let's go ahead and kick it off. Rita, we have you here for follow-ups from last sync. You want to go ahead and run through these?
Yeah, for sure. So these are some of the items that were called out by Hashi last time when we had a quick sync before we had a community call set up. And so I put it here just to make sure we cover them. I think only probably the last 3 items are Vault provider specific, so we can skip them until those folks can join. Today they have a conflict because of company all hands. So let's start with the first item. I thought it'd be good to have, especially the provider folks, to chime in on, let's discuss what 1.0 looks like for the CSI driver. And then I think there was also questions about what does 1.0 looks like for a particular provider. So if you don't mind clicking on that, we can maybe open up that doc. And if you have any comments, feel free to add it to the doc as well.
Not sure what mine.
You can click on the thing.
No, that's sorry. This might be faster. I'm using a different box today.
Okay. Anish, do you want to kick this off?
Yeah, sure. So we have a couple of GitHub issues open. So what I kind of did was go through that and also consider what all things would be really good before we can call the CSI driver stable. So the first and the foremost thing is basically performance and load tests. So just to ensure that the pod latency and during startup is not affected by having the CSI volume mount. And also when there are a large number of pods deployed at the same time, then the driver can handle all the concurrent pods coming in. So we have a GitHub issue for that. And one idea around that is to be using cluster loader to run the test. I've run some tests locally, but I think what we essentially want to do is have this as part of the driver pipeline, so that every time we could probably run a periodic job and just have the load test results published on GitHub so that users can see and they're aware of how well it's performing. So the second one is basically the complete life cycle of the secret or key mounted in the pod. So today the driver supports fetching the contents from the external secret store and mounting it in the pod, or also syncing that as Kubernetes secrets. But one other part of the story that needs to be covered is the secret rotation. So what happens if the user rotates the secret in the external secret store, then the driver would need to fetch the rotated secret and then update the mount content on all the pods. So there's a GitHub issue for that. There's been discussion on the design, and there's also a design proposal for it. So I think once we have a complete story for the secret management, then I think that'll be a good value add. The third one is fairly simple, where it's just having a good unit test coverage on all the code that we have right now. I've started adding some initial unit test framework, but I think what we want to do is try and add a unit test for all the code that is implemented, and that way we can ensure that any new code added also has unit tests and it doesn't break anything. The fourth one is end-to-end coverage. So today we are using bats to run tests. We are doing that today for the driver with Azure provider and the Vault provider. And essentially where we want to go is try and use something like Ginkgo or even maybe Cluster API test framework, so that it's easier for new users as well as external contributors to add new tests to our repo. And also we can ensure that every feature that we support that's part of the documentation is thoroughly covered with unit tests. So the fourth one is basically just having a complete end-to-end coverage for the driver. Also making the end-to-end test framework easier for new users to add to it. And the fifth one is end-to-end test coverage for providers as well. So one of the criteria for being a provider for the Secret Source CSI driver, as documented in the README, is having an end-to-end test pipeline as part of the driver, so that any driver changes that are made are compatible with all the providers. So we want to ensure that. We want to have that for all the providers and have tests for all the features that are added. And the sixth one is basically the CSI driver and Kubernetes version supportability matrix. So basically, we just want to document if there's any breaking changes, or if it's not backward compatible. Basically, we want to document a matrix saying which version of the driver is compatible with which Kubernetes version. And this could apply for providers as well, where if there's any breaking change in the driver, where the provider is no longer compatible, then the providers could document that what is the minimum supported version, and they could have a matrix for that. I think, Rita, do you want to do the last two?
Yeah, I think part of marking it to 1.0, we should have some documentation or recommendation or default deployment for HA for the driver, to make sure it's highly available for production usage. And last but not least, also we should probably do a security audit. I know CNCF offers security audit, so maybe this is something we can look into. All right, any comments or feedback?
Just going to make one comment. What is your experience? How long does that security audit cycle take?
Yeah, we did one for the OPA Gatekeeper project. That one, the review itself takes about a week, and then maybe if there are issues back and forth, maybe 2 weeks, and then the project team will take the report and then fix the issues identified. So maybe there's some back and forth. So altogether, maybe a month and a half.
Okay. I guess what I'll add, I'll throw this to, well, I'll ask you this, Rita, but I'll also want to get Tommy's input. Should other providers be a part of the repo so that they can do a full security review at that point? Or is it just kind of some base level driver code that needs to be reviewed?
That's a good question. I think given that only the driver is part of CNCF Kubernetes, it makes sense to focus on the driver itself.
Okay.
because providers the pattern is each provider will be responsible for their own implementation.
Gotcha.
Yeah, I was going to say, like, yeah, these all seem reasonable requirements. I guess I would want to look a little bit more into what the like load test requirements would be, because I could see some issues there with the way the driver execs the provider binary, of us running into like a lot of like startup time from just the exec of that and the like handshakes to their secret API, and some of the stuff that we have to do for the workload identity of trading kind of the pod token for the like Google token, which I think is a pretty similar pattern to the vault auth story. But some of that stuff I could see that running into performance problems, depending on what like the targets are for the load test. And then for secret rotation, like, yeah, that seems like a pretty critical like user journey. But I haven't really dug into the current like designs there. So yes, I agree with the list. I'd want to look at kind of some of the details of those first two items.
Yeah, I think that's why one of the suggestions was to use cluster loaders so that we can test the pod latency and also the CPU resource and the usage consumption. And I think like that'll really help if we could have a periodic job. But I definitely agree with what you said.
Awesome. Okay. Any other comments before we move on to the next items? Are we good? Okay. Silence is a yes. All right. Next up.
Yeah, I can take it. I think Rita, we lost Rita. But the next one is basically the Kubernetes secret sync reconciler feature. So as part of the last release, the 0.0.11 for the driver, one of the most requested feature was after the contents is mounted in the pod, they also wanted the secret contents to be created as Kubernetes secrets. So they could use that from secret reference, or they could just inject that as environment variables. So with the last release, we implemented that feature, and with the PR link that I've posted here, we've kind of redesigned that particular feature to have a separate controller do the reconcile. So that the driver the controller is still part of the driver, but the node publish volume just mounts the contents, and then we have a separate controller which reconciles, reads the mounted contents, and then creates Kubernetes secrets from those. So in the GitHub issue, there is a link to the design doc, and in the PR description, there's a link to the design doc, and the PR has been merged, but I think like still it'll be nice if we can review the design doc when we get a chance, because this is still not part of an official release. So if you think we need to change the design, we can always change the design before cutting the release. But essentially what we've done is we've added a new CRD called secret provider class pod status. So once the node publish volume is successfully completed, this CRD is created as a tracker, which says mounted is true and what the target path is. And we have a reconciler that's watching on this particular custom resource. And every time a new custom resource comes in, it goes and checks if the user wants Kubernetes secret objects out of these contents. If they do, then it creates a secret, and it adds the secret provider class pod status as owner reference. So once all the pods go away, because of the owner reference, the secret also gets deleted.
In this, does the reconciler, like what is reading the secret it's not the reconciler job, right? Like, right? Or like,
So the recon.
Yeah.
Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm just curious on like the principle that's reading the secret that then gets written to the Kubernetes secret. Is it still just like only the plugin doing the read on the node publish event thing? Or
So the controller is still part of the driver. So the reconciler is still part of the driver. It runs as a separate process. But the node publish volume only mounts the contents in the pod, and then it just creates this tracker CRD, and that's it. And then it responds back to kubelet saying the node publish volume was successful. And then this reconciler that's constantly watching for this custom resource, it detects this new custom resource come in, and then it goes and checks if this particular pod spec requires the contents as a Kubernetes secret. If it does, then the reconciler creates the Kubernetes secret, and in the owner reference for the Kubernetes secret, it adds this tracker CRD into it.
Okay, so it's still the driver calls the plugin writes the secret, then the driver's controller process reads the file, and then does the write to the Kubernetes secret.
Right.
Is there a standard file path format that all of the drivers or the plugins are expected to support? Is the one that I have currently is slightly different than the the Azure path, like the CRD for the secret
provider class.
Yeah, it doesn't really specify like how deep to go for like the specification for that doesn't include the like this is the cloud resource, this is the file on disk, like to that specificity.
So the secret provider class, the one that the user defines, has certain mandatory fields, right? Like the provider and then parameters and all that. And within the parameters, it's a more generic. Basically, it could be specific, different for each provider, what all keys that they support in that array, like the object file path or object name, object type. So that could differ between each provider, but the CRD, I think in this design document is another CRD that's created as a tracker.
Okay, thanks.
If I could ask a question in relation to the whole creating of secrets, is that just to have that ability because some folks really want it? Like one of the core feature sets of CSI and this functionality is that you don't use Kubernetes secrets.
Right. I know this is probably the most asked feature ever for this solution, as well as like the old deprecated flex volume solution. And we explained many times like, hey, this is not the most secure option. And but I think there is still a need for from a lot of users to synchronize and store them as Kubernetes secrets so that they can use it as Kubernetes secrets in their applications. And that's why we added the feature, but it's optional.
Right. Yeah, it seems like we have gone full circle and fully regressed back to Kubernetes secrets, which have this bad habit of not being very secret. Right? Like your fancy production encryption keys are available to your ingress controller because it needs all or whatever, right? Like it's not exactly the hope of this code. But okay, yeah, I'm pragmatic. I understand if that folks need functionality. I was just the path of I'm going to use all this complicated stuff to like wire in my secrets.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think from what we learned from users who are asking for this feature, I think the pattern is such that there are users who really care about the security of these secret content, and they won't opt in, right? Like they would just go with the default behavior, so the most secure way, right, out of the box. And then there's people who don't really care about that because they have their own encryption for STD, but in that scenario, they still want this data to be propagated through so that they can have this one single source of truth being the key management system, but still leverage Kubernetes objects.
Yeah, it's I don't think it's an unfair ask. It's just I hope people understand that like the core security gets lost. It's just the wiring is there. So yeah, if Vault is the source of truth, then cool. Vault retains being the source of truth, and everything sort of follows along. But you do lose the sort of the aspect of if you know you can imagine if you don't allow exec and you have all the right admission plugins and the right constraints on your pods, the only thing that can ever read your pod is the kubelet, or sorry, the only thing that can read the secret is the kubelet and the pod that's supposed to have it, and obviously the plugin.
Right.
Yeah, I was gonna say, like, it would be nice for this feature to be installable separately, or like the role bindings to not be included like by default, kind of some of those things, because yeah, I think we also want to, I saw the like the use case of the ingress controller like could only use environment vars, and this was a good way to do that. Like, yeah, I understand the use cases and why they end up wanting to, but I want it a little bit harder for them to enable. But
Right. Also the most asked feature.
yeah.
All right.
I think I like your feedback about making conditional on our role binding though. I think today we do deploy it by default, which you only need if you are synchronizing the secret. So let's add an issue for that.
So really, can you sum that up real quick? I'm just trying to jot that. The issue is to have a conditional.
Okay, so I think the feedback is, maybe have at least from like the Helm chart, have a flag that says, hey, do you want to enable like the sync secrets feature, right? If so, then we'll deploy all the roles and role bindings to get more more elevated privilege, right? If not, then the operator who's installing this is basically saying, I would never want this driver to do this. And therefore we should not deploy those role bindings. Am I summarizing that correctly, Tommy?
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. If you want me to file the issue, I can also just write it.
Yeah, that'd be great. Thanks.
All right. Thanks, Tommy. All right. Is that it? Have we covered the vault provider?
No, I think let's.
Okay, Hashi's not here to chat about that.
I think we still want to do the rotation feature design. I think Brian probably wants to talk about it.
Okay.
So yeah, so I've been working with Anish primarily and Rita to fleshing out a design for the secrets rotation. So far, I've been piggybacking off of Anish's new PR of using a pod status CRD, which acts as a tracker where you can know which secret provider class it belongs to which pod, essentially. And so using that, you're able to know exactly what secrets are projected to each pod. And so I built in a sidecar that the rotations reconciler will build up a payload using the tracking of knowing what objects are coming from that secret provider class, as well as all of the information from the pod, and recalling the provider. So some of the issues that we've noticed and came across with this specific implementation is that there is a race condition. So since, let's say if you have 50 pods deployed onto your cluster, that means that there will be 50 different pod statuses and the reconcilers looping through each of those 50 pod statuses. If you make it through 25 pods and those, if you make it through 25 pods and then all of a sudden, let's say that the reconciler goes out, then you'll have half of your pods will be updated with the correct secrets, and then half of your pods will not be updated as well. So that can cause a huge issue with possibly breaking your application. And also the case of if your reconciler just goes down in general, then if there is an unsyncing between if someone needs a specific secret from your secret store to connect to a database, and that can cause an issue if they've updated that secret on the database. Then how do you, you will have a break of actually getting access to that database as well, which can break your app too. So those are two of the main issues that I'm trying to work through at the moment. And so, yeah, if, I think Anish just linked up this design doc for the secret rotation, and I might need to add permissions correctly to it. So let me know if you can't get access, and I can give you access to that doc as well.
Thanks, Brian. Any feedback on that scenario from anyone else?
I just have a quick question on it. Is this like to update secrets if the secret provider class changes, or is it if to pull an external store at some interval for new values?
Yes, so how I'm running the reconciler at the meantime, just from the first iteration is through an interval. So it's going to work on a poll of, let's say, arbitrarily 5 minutes, where it'll build up and call that provider. So the actual version and is tracked within of the secret provider or the pod status CRD. So that way it'll know what pod is running what version of a secret. And it'll use that to be able to compare the newly fetched one from the specific secret store and compare that that's tracked on the actual pod to the newly fetched one from the secret store, and then use that as a reconciliation and decide whether it's going to rewrite that file or not.
Okay, cool, thank you.
Okay. All right, we will skip over Hashi's, and we'll give the floor to Tommy. Go ahead.
Yeah, this is just one of the Kubernetes features that I think is being discussed of how to pass pod service account tokens to CSI drivers. And it also includes a mechanism for, so for including that in the node, was it publish or, yeah, the node publish volume to include the token for the pod, and an option to remount where I think it's similar to the what was just mentioned about repeatedly, on some polling interval. I think the CSI spec could repeatedly call node publish volume, and then I think it's up to the CSI driver to determine what to do and whether or not to take an action there. But yeah, I wanted to point that out since it's in review. It seems useful for the GCP plugin, because our way of doing a pod identity is to use the pod service account token that's like issued by Kubernetes, and then we trade that for like a GCP identity. And right now, like my implementation has me calling like the create token against the Kubernetes service account API in order to get that information, where this would be helpful to have that as part of the node event. Yeah, so just wanted to point that out.
This is great. Thanks for pointing to this. And I do see Hashi's mentioned in the proposal as well. So with the change, with the proposed change, do you think in terms of you know, the change in your provider code, would it just basically require the driver to pass that information to the provider? Okay.
Yeah, like I think the driver currently passes like the pod UID to plugins, or like the pod name, or some of those attribute fields. I believe it would just be an additional attribute field that is a token for the pod. Yeah, I didn't see this until like last week, so I'm still kind of reviewing it, but yeah.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
I've forgotten the exact state of that. Did we ever get to like making a cap? Maybe we have a cap as like is it moving forward? Are we going to actually do this? Because it was discussed in SIG-Auth, but SIG-Auth doesn't own SIG storage, so we can't like make them do it. We can ask, but it's, you know, it's their code, so they have to sort of do the. I mean, if someone wants to do the work, I'm sure people would be happy to review and stuff. But yeah, I was curious if we got to the point where there was at least an agreed upon design / API, or are we still at the just talking about it phase?
I'm not too familiar with the Kubernetes proposal process, so I don't know.
Okay. Well, I guess.
Mike chiming in the cap though.
Say what?
I do see Mike commenting in the cap.
Okay. So there was at least some engagement there, but I assume it hasn't sort of gotten to the point of like, yay, we're happy, like implementable. Someone go and make it happen, kind of deal.
Not. I don't think it's obvious looking at this.
Okay. That's fine. I'm just kind of curious how far we got. I actually wasn't even sure if we got to the point of having a cap. I had like sort of lost track of it. Yeah, no, but I like this idea. I want this stuff. Okay, like broke my wires. Yeah.
All right. Thanks, Mo. Nish, you want to discuss the supporting of the custom namespace for the provider class?
Yeah, I think last week we made a change in the master where basically we are trying to only match the secret provider class in the same namespace as the application pod. Just because it follows proper RBAC, and that way we ensure that a user who is limited to a particular namespace cannot access from another namespace. So there's one more PR that we have open where the user could configure the secret provider class namespace to a different namespace. Basically, it's providing the user with an option to do that. So I think basically I wanted to bring it up for discussion and see if it's something that we want to do, or rather we should stick with just getting the secret provider class from the same namespace as the pod. The default behavior is same namespace, and with that PR, it's an option for the user to provide a different namespace for us to look up.
Yeah, so my initial thought on this was more like the usual RBAC pattern where only objects in the same namespace can access objects in the same namespace, right? So if we were to deviate from that, we might run into some weird behaviors. So that's why I think we want to open this up to everybody to get feedback.
Could you guys describe it again? I don't think I caught exactly how we had cross namespace.
So today, the user creates a custom resource, the secret provider class, where they provide all the attributes for the provider specific details, and then they reference that in their pod. Mm-hmm. So with the change that was done in the master last week, what we're doing is we are only looking up the secret provider class with that name, which is in the same namespace as the pod by default. And this PR basically is just adding another attribute called secret provider class namespace, which the user could define to be something else. So the pod is running in Cube system, and they could set secret provider class namespace to default. And that way the provider would just, the driver would just look up in the default namespace because the user provided that. So I think what we're trying to gain, the feedback is this something that we want to support? Because I think in case of PVCs, for if the user wants to define a secret, like secret reference, they could do that from a different namespace. Like they could reference from a different namespace. But that's not the case for CSI.
My initial gut says don't do that. I need to think on it. Yeah, no, I generally don't like things referring to things in other namespaces. It generally doesn't lead to outcomes I'm happy with in the end.
Yeah, I'm afraid that might like lead to unexpected behaviors because it's kind of anti-pattern, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, at the very least, you are able to invoke a read from a privileged actor in a namespace that you may have no like access to. Theoretically, I mean, you definitely get information leakage, right? Like you could even discern if namespaces exist based on like particular error messages you see when like the kubelet tries to reach out or the plugin tries to reach out to like. And like if you only have access to one namespace, you actually don't know what exists out there in the whole cluster. Those are sort of like the obvious things that come to mind, but I'm trying to think of like, what is like the sort of human-facing use case? Is it like to have more reuse, or like what is sort of driving the need?
Yeah, it's for more reuse basically. Like they have just one. They could just have one namespace where they have all the secret provider classes defined, and they could just reference that in different namespaces.
Is that like a very common pattern? Like,
no, I mean it's not a common pattern.
The sort of the thing I'm trying to understand is like, should something like this class be a cluster scoped object, and you refer to the class just as is, and it's always cluster scoped and like it's always shared, like, or is it meant to be namespace and maybe theoretically there's some reuse? Like basically I'm trying to think of like, does this need the flexibility that like cluster roles and roles have, where you can have them at both levels and you can refer to them as such, or is this meant to be like one bucket or the other?
So it's meant to be namespace scoped. So that's how we've been doing it, so that it's just in one particular namespace, and they could have the same name in different namespaces. So like the cluster admin would just deploy in one particular namespace. And I think going along those lines, it does not make sense to allow them to just reference it from a different namespace if it's going to be namespace scoped.
Yeah, so I think we should treat this object similar to Kubernetes secrets, right? And make sure that only people who have access to create this secret provider class can actually use them. And that's why I think keeping them in the same namespace makes sense to me. And I guess like if there are users who want to for reusability of the same resource, we can, maybe open up an issue and see how many people want that, and then we can go from there. I don't think we should design it to tailor a kind of a one-off request, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And this was, I guess, again, the pattern here was just to control the namespace that houses all the secrets. So it's not really about name collision of secrets or anything, right? It's
no, so this is basically like the user-defined resource. The secret provider class, the user defines it, and the default behavior from the driver is it looks up the secret provider class from the same namespace as the pod.
Right.
But for this PR, it's basically just allowing the user to define a custom namespace so we can look up from that namespace.
Gotcha. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, to a certain degree, certainly you could have a workaround where you have a controller that takes like some namespaces objects and just mints them out across matching label selectors or the entire cluster. So you could certainly work around this if you didn't want to sort of have to manage them per namespace with just a controller. I would probably lean towards like, if this was like really requested, having that like as an option. So that way, in the same way as like, Tommy had said earlier about, I want you to opt in to this behavior with mounting into secrets. I would really want you to opt in and sort of like understand that, yeah, I created it over here, but I actually gave it to everyone on purpose. So.
Yeah, that makes sense.
All right.
Okay, sorry. I just want to ask Tommy a little bit about the issue that he created for what was it? You had linked in this doc for new values binding to the latest version of a secret, right? That sounds a lot like the secret rotation stuff we just talked about earlier. Okay.
Yeah. I will
All right.
look more at that design doc. Yeah.
Okay, great.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Okay. So I think that's it for what we have for discussion. We will move Hashi's to next meeting and then pick up from there. And if anyone wants to moderate next meeting, please let me know, or just add your name into this doc, as well as, again, any other type of items you guys want to discuss.
Tommy, I think earlier you had a question about how to get the Google provider in, right?
Yeah, that's something I will want to do soon once I am able to like go through a few more, write some more code first on it. But yeah, then that will be a goal, is to get included as one of the supported providers.
Okay, so we have a provider like criteria in as part of the project README. Okay, yeah. If you have any questions, just let us know.
Yeah, once I get closer to that, I'll probably be more active in the Slack channel there on some of those questions. Thanks.
Great, thank you.
All right. I think that's it. That's all the topics we had for this meeting. Again, this is bi-weekly, so we will see everyone. I can find my calendar here. On the 23rd, within 2 weeks. And again, feel free to load up the doc with anything you want to discuss. And again, if you want to moderate, and or take notes, go ahead and assign your name to those particular items as well. All right, so with that, I mean, I think this was a pretty productive inaugural meeting here. I think we got some things moving forward. So with that, any last comments or statements from anyone before we close? All right, we'll take silence as we're okay. All right, thank you everyone that showed up and participated. We'll get this meeting out on the channel here soon, and I will also update the notes that I've taken in the doc as well. All right, have a great rest of your day, and we'll talk to you in a couple of weeks.
Thanks.